He thought he was protecting the reputation of an exclusive restaurant. But within the next few minutes, everyone in the room would discover the true cost of judging a stranger by her appearance. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below. And if you believe dignity matters more than status, be sure to like and subscribe. Stories like this remind us that respect should never depend on what someone is wearing. Now, back to Emily Carter. The winter afternoon sunlight spilled across the towering glass windows of La Belle Maison, one of Chicago's most prestigious restaurants. Crystal chandeliers cast warm reflections across polished marble floors, while servers in tailored uniforms moved gracefully between tables occupied by executives, attorneys, and affluent socialites enjoying late lunch meetings. Every detail inside the restaurant projected exclusivity. Every detail was designed to make guests feel important. As the revolving door turned slowly, a woman stepped inside who seemed completely out of place. At least, that was what several people immediately assumed. Emily Carter paused near the entrance and quietly removed her wool coat. She wore a simple cream-colored sweater, dark blue jeans, and comfortable brown flats. Her light brown hair rested neatly on her shoulders, and she carried a modest leather handbag that showed signs of years of use. There were no designer logos, no expensive jewelry, no attempt to impress anyone. She simply looked like an ordinary woman stopping for lunch after running errands. A few nearby diners glanced up from their meals before quickly returning to their conversations. Others stared a little longer. One woman whispered something to her companion while subtly gesturing toward Emily's outfit. Emily noticed the looks, but showed no reaction. She had encountered them before. People often saw what they expected to see. They noticed clothing before character, appearance before substance. It was a lesson she had learned long ago. Across the dining room, restaurant manager Victor Reynolds reviewed reservation schedules from behind a polished walnut podium. At 46 years old, Victor took immense pride in maintaining what he called the restaurant's image. He believed he could identify valuable customers within seconds. Years of working in luxury hospitality had convinced him that appearances revealed everything a person needed to know. When his eyes landed on Emily, his expression tightened almost immediately. He watched her walk calmly through the entrance, taking in every detail of her modest appearance. To Victor, she represented a potential problem. The kind of guest who might make the wealthy clientele uncomfortable. The kind of guest who didn't fit the image he worked so hard to preserve. He straightened his tie and stepped away from the podium. Emily looked around the elegant dining room with quiet appreciation. The soft piano music, the warm lighting, the scent of freshly baked bread drifting from the kitchen. She smiled faintly. What she didn't know was that Victor had already made a decision about her before hearing a single word she had to say. And what Victor didn't know was that the woman he was about to judge would soon teach everyone in that restaurant a lesson they would never forget. The room felt calm, sophisticated, predictable, but that was about to change. Emily approached the reservation podium with the same calm confidence she carried into every room. She offered a polite smile as Victor arrived, his expression professional on the surface but already colored by assumptions he had made moments earlier. "Good afternoon," Emily said warmly. "I have a reservation under Carter." Victor glanced down at the digital schedule in his hand. His fingers moved quickly across the screen. For a brief moment, confusion crossed his face. Then it disappeared. "I am sorry," he replied. "I do not see a reservation under that name." Emily nodded politely. "Would you mind checking again? It was booked several days ago for 1:30. Victor barely looked at the screen a second time. "I already checked." His voice remained courteous, but there was a subtle edge beneath it. "There is nothing here." Emily frowned slightly. She rarely encountered reservation issues. She reached into her handbag and retrieved her phone. "I received a confirmation email yesterday," she explained. "Perhaps there is a small mistake." Victor watched as she searched through her messages. Instead of listening, he found himself studying her sweater, her handbag, and her worn flats. Every detail reinforced the story he had already created in his mind. Behind Emily, several guests entered wearing tailored suits and expensive coats. Victor immediately smiled. His posture changed. His tone became warmer. "Welcome back, Mr. Hamilton," he said as he greeted one of the arriving diners. The contrast was subtle but unmistakable. Emily noticed it. So did a few nearby customers. After a moment, she found the confirmation and held her phone toward him. "Here it is," she said gently. "Emily Carter. Table for one." Victor accepted the phone reluctantly. The reservation was clearly displayed on the screen. For the briefest second, his confidence wavered. Then he noticed something else. The reservation had originally been made for a private corner table, one of the most desirable locations in the restaurant. A table usually reserved for influential guests and long-standing patrons. Victor's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. He could not reconcile the reservation with the woman standing in front of him. It simply did not fit his expectations. "I see the issue," he finally said. "Unfortunately, that table is no longer available." Emily blinked. "No longer available?" "There was a scheduling adjustment." "I understand," she replied. "Any table is fine." Victor hesitated. The truth was that several tables remained open throughout the dining room. Yet something inside him resisted seating her among the restaurant's most affluent customers. He told himself he was protecting the atmosphere, protecting the brand, protecting the experience. The dangerous thing about prejudice was that it often disguised itself as professionalism. "Would you mind waiting a little while?" he asked. Emily glanced around the room. Empty tables were visible from where she stood. "How long?" "I cannot say for certain." Nearby, a young hostess named Rachel looked up from her station. She had seen the reservation earlier that morning. She knew multiple tables were available. Her eyes shifted nervously between Victor and Emily, but she remained silent. Emily slipped her phone back into her handbag. "I drove nearly 40 minutes for this meeting," she said. "I would appreciate any accommodation you can provide." Victor forced a smile. "I will see what can be done." As he turned away, Emily remained standing near the entrance, unaware that several people had already begun quietly watching the situation unfold. And somewhere deep inside the restaurant, a chain of events had just begun that would soon become impossible for anyone to ignore. Victor disappeared into the dining room, leaving Emily standing near the entrance while conversations continued around her. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Guests who had arrived after her were escorted to tables almost immediately. Servers carried plates of grilled salmon, filet mignon, and fresh pasta through the softly lit room, while Emily remained beside the podium like an afterthought no one wanted to acknowledge. She checked the time on her phone. Her lunch meeting was scheduled to begin in less than 20 minutes. The organization she planned to meet represented a community scholarship initiative, one she had spent months researching. Missing the meeting was not an option. Still, she remained patient. Patience had become one of her greatest strengths over the years. Across the room, Rachel quietly approached Victor. "Sir," she said carefully, lowering her voice, "Table 12 is still available, and so is the corner booth near the window." Victor glanced toward Emily before answering. "I know." Rachel hesitated. "Then should I seat her?" Victor's expression hardened. "I said I would handle it." Rachel immediately stepped back. She knew better than to argue. Yet even she could sense that something was wrong. This was no longer about reservations. It was becoming personal. A few moments later, Victor returned to the entrance. His smile looked rehearsed. "Miss Carter," he began, "I am afraid we may not be able to accommodate you today." Emily looked genuinely surprised. "You have multiple empty tables." Victor folded his hands. "Those tables are reserved." Emily glanced toward the dining room. Several of the supposedly reserved tables had remained empty the entire time she had been waiting. "I see," she replied quietly. Her calmness somehow irritated Victor even more. He had expected frustration, perhaps an argument. Instead, she remained composed. Nearby diners had begun paying attention. Human curiosity was impossible to suppress. One businessman lowered his newspaper. A woman at a nearby table paused in the middle of a conversation. The atmosphere was slowly changing. Victor sensed the attention and unconsciously straightened his posture. If people were watching, he wanted them to see him in control. "Perhaps there are other restaurants nearby that would better suit your needs," he said. The words sounded polite, but the meaning beneath them was unmistakable. Emily understood immediately. A brief silence followed. "My needs?" she asked gently. Victor offered a tight smile. La Belle Maison provides a very specific dining experience. The room seemed to grow quieter. Emily studied him for a moment. Not with anger, not even with disappointment. More with curiosity, as though she were trying to understand how someone could make such confident judgments without knowing anything about the person standing in front of him. "And what exactly do you believe my needs are?" she asked. Victor froze for half a second. The question caught him off guard. Several nearby guests exchanged glances. Suddenly the conversation was no longer one-sided. Yet instead of reconsidering, Victor doubled down. "I simply believe our restaurant may not be the best fit." The words landed heavily. Emily slowly nodded. The message was clear now. Very clear. And for the first time since arriving, a faint sadness appeared in her eyes. Not because she had been denied a table, but because she had just confirmed exactly what kind of place this was becoming. Emily lowered her eyes for a moment and gently tightened her grip on the leather strap of her handbag. Around her, the restaurant slowly returned to its conversations, but not completely. The tension lingered in the air like a note that had not fully faded. Victor seemed satisfied. In his mind, the matter was settled. The woman who did not belong would soon leave, and the image of the restaurant would remain intact. What he failed to understand was that dignity is often quiet. It does not argue. It does not shout. It simply remembers. Emily looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Snowflakes drifted softly beyond the glass, covering the sidewalks in a thin layer of white. For a brief second, her reflection stared back at her. A simple sweater, simple shoes, no visible signs of wealth, no visible signs of influence. Exactly the way she preferred it. Years earlier, Emily had made a promise to herself that money would never change how she lived. Growing up in a small apartment on the south side of the city, she had watched her mother work double shifts while still finding time to help neighbors who had even less. Back then, kindness had been a currency more valuable than any bank account. It was a lesson Emily never forgot. Even after success entered her life. Even after opportunities most people only dreamed about. Wealth had given her freedom, but it had never become her identity. She still shopped at local stores. She still drove herself most days. She still believed people revealed their true character when they thought no one important was watching. Ironically, moments like this were often the most revealing. Rachel approached carefully. "Ms. Carter," she said quietly, "I am sorry about this." Emily offered a small smile. "You do not need to apologize." Rachel glanced toward Victor. "I know there are open tables." Emily nodded. "I know." The young hostess looked embarrassed. "I wish I could do something." "You already did," Emily replied. "You showed kindness." Rachel blinked, surprised by the answer. Most people would have been angry by now. Some would have demanded a manager above Victor. Others would have created a scene. Emily did neither. Her calmness somehow carried more weight than anger ever could. Across the dining room, Victor noticed them talking and immediately walked over. His patience was beginning to wear thin. "Ms. Carter," he said firmly, "if you are not dining with us today, I am going to ask that you clear the entrance area." Several nearby guests turned their heads again. The room grew quieter. Emily slowly looked at him. "You are asking me to leave?" Victor forced a professional smile. "I believe that would be best." For a second, nobody spoke. The pianist in the corner continued playing a soft melody while crystal glasses reflected the warm afternoon light. Then Emily gave a slow nod. There was no anger in her expression, no resentment, only disappointment. "Very well," she said. She turned toward the door and began walking outside. Victor watched her leave, convinced he had solved the problem. What he could not possibly know was that the real story had not even begun yet. Outside, beneath the falling snow, Emily reached into her coat pocket, unlocked her phone, and made a single call. When the person on the other end answered, she spoke only 3 words. "I am outside now." The cold Chicago air wrapped around Emily as she stepped onto the sidewalk. Snow continued drifting from the gray afternoon sky, settling softly on parked cars and the bare branches lining the street. Behind her, through the massive glass windows, the restaurant glowed with warmth and luxury. Inside, people laughed over expensive meals and business deals. Outside, Emily stood alone. Yet strangely, she felt calmer than she had moments earlier. The phone call had lasted less than 10 seconds. No explanations, no complaints, no anger, just 3 simple words. Now she slipped her phone back into her coat pocket and waited. Across the street, traffic moved steadily through downtown. Yellow taxis passed. Delivery trucks rumbled by. Pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks, trying to escape the winter chill. To anyone watching, Emily looked like an ordinary woman waiting for a ride. Inside the restaurant, Victor returned to the reservation podium, feeling a growing sense of satisfaction. The uncomfortable situation was over. The entrance looked presentable again. The atmosphere had been preserved. At least, that was what he told himself. Rachel, however, could not shake a feeling of unease. She glanced through the windows and noticed Emily still standing outside. Something about the image bothered her. "She is still there," Rachel quietly said. Victor barely looked up. "That is no longer our concern. She seemed nice." Victor sighed impatiently. "Rachel, hospitality is about maintaining standards." The young hostess nodded, though she was not convinced. She had worked in customer service long enough to recognize kindness when she saw it. And Emily had shown more grace during 10 difficult minutes than many wealthy guests showed in an entire evening. Several diners near the windows had also noticed her standing outside. A woman in a navy business suit frowned as she watched. Why was that woman asked to leave? She quietly asked her lunch companion. He shrugged. No idea. Neither returned to their meal immediately. The scene had left an impression. Meanwhile, Emily looked down the street. Her expression remained peaceful, but her thoughts drifted elsewhere. She remembered her mother's words from years ago. People show you who they are when they think you have nothing to offer them. The lesson had proven true again and again throughout her life. Some judged clothing. Others judged neighborhoods, jobs, or appearances. Very few took time to learn a person's story. A faint smile touched her lips. She was not thinking about revenge. She never was. She was thinking about how easily respect could be given and how often people chose not to give it. Then something changed. A distant engine note echoed between the buildings. At first, nobody paid attention. The sound grew louder as a sleek black sports car turned onto the street. Heads slowly began turning. Even from half a block away, the vehicle stood out. Its polished exterior reflected the city lights and falling snow like black glass. The car moved with quiet confidence before smoothly approaching the curb directly in front of the restaurant. Inside, several guests near the windows instinctively looked up. Conversations began fading. Victor noticed the movement and glanced outside. The moment he saw the car stop at the curb, he straightened slightly. Something about the arrival immediately captured the attention of the entire room. And as the driver's door began to open, the next chapter of the story quietly arrived with it. The black Porsche came to a smooth stop at the curb, its engine settling into silence beneath the falling snow. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out wearing a charcoal overcoat tailored with understated elegance. His movements were calm and unhurried, the kind of confidence that never needed to announce itself. Several people inside the restaurant recognized him immediately. A businessman near the window nearly dropped his fork. Two women seated nearby exchanged startled glances. Even before anyone spoke his name, the atmosphere began to change. Jonathan Carter was not the sort of person people easily forgot. Over the past decade, his technology company had grown into one of the most successful firms in the country. Financial magazines featured him regularly. Business networks analyzed his investments. His reputation extended far beyond Chicago. Yet despite his success, those who knew him personally often described him as surprisingly humble. Jonathan closed the car door and looked directly toward Emily. The moment he saw her standing alone outside in the cold, concern crossed his face. He walked toward her immediately. Through the restaurant windows, dozens of eyes followed every step. Emily greeted him with a small smile. "You got here quickly," she said. Jonathan returned the smile. "Your call sounded unusual." His eyes briefly moved toward the restaurant entrance. "What happened?" Emily hesitated. Not because she was embarrassed, but because she disliked creating problems for others. "It is nothing important," she replied. Jonathan studied her expression. After years of marriage, he knew when she was minimizing something. "Emily," she sighed softly, "I had a reservation." Jonathan waited. "And, apparently, I was not the right fit." The words were simple, but their meaning was not. Jonathan glanced through the windows. Inside, Victor felt an uncomfortable knot forming in his stomach. Recognition had arrived slowly at first. Then all at once, he knew exactly who Jonathan Carter was. Every major hospitality executive in Chicago knew his name. Victor's confidence began slipping away. Rachel noticed the change immediately. "Sir?" she asked quietly. Victor did not answer. His attention remained fixed on the man outside. Meanwhile, Jonathan listened as Emily calmly explained what had happened. She described the missing table, the waiting, the suggestion that another restaurant might better suit her needs. She repeated every detail without anger, accusation, or exaggeration. By the time she finished, Jonathan's expression had become very still. Not angry, not emotional, simply disappointed. He looked toward the restaurant again. Through the glass, Victor suddenly felt exposed in a way he had never experienced before. Jonathan finally spoke. "You waited 40 minutes?" Emily nodded. "Something like that." Snowflakes settled on Jonathan's coat as he exhaled slowly. Then he offered his arm to his wife. "Come on." Emily looked at him curiously. "Where are we going?" A faint smile appeared on his face. Inside, behind the windows, the room had become almost completely silent. Guests who had no idea what was happening sensed something significant unfolding. Conversations faded. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the pianist seemed to play more softly. Because everyone could feel it now. The story Victor believed he had finished was only beginning. And within the next few minutes, every assumption he had made would be tested under the bright light of truth. The restaurant doors opened as Jonathan and Emily stepped inside together. Warm air replaced the winter chill, but the atmosphere inside had become noticeably colder. Conversations that normally filled the dining room had faded into scattered whispers. More than a few guests recognized Jonathan immediately. Some had attended charity galas with him. Others had seen him featured on business networks or financial magazines. One executive sitting near the bar quietly lowered his phone and stared. A woman near the windows leaned toward her husband and whispered his name. Recognition spread through the room faster than anyone could stop it. Victor felt his pulse quicken. Moments earlier, he had been completely certain of his judgment. Now uncertainty was beginning to consume him. Jonathan approached the reservation podium with calm, measured steps. Emily remained beside him, composed as always. Neither appeared interested in creating a scene. Somehow that made the situation even more uncomfortable. "Good afternoon," Jonathan said. His voice was polite, professional, and impossible to misinterpret. Victor forced a smile. "Mr. Carter, what an unexpected pleasure." Jonathan studied him for a moment. "Is it?" The question was simple, yet Victor immediately felt its weight. "Of course," he replied quickly. "We are honored to have you here." Jonathan glanced around the dining room before returning his attention to Victor. "That is interesting." Victor swallowed. "Sir, because my wife was apparently not offered the same hospitality." The room seemed to freeze. Several nearby diners openly stopped pretending not to listen. Rachel stood motionless behind the podium. Emily quietly looked down, almost uncomfortable with the attention. Jonathan was not raising his voice. He was not accusing anyone dramatically. He was simply stating a fact, and facts are often harder to escape than anger. Victor attempted a nervous laugh. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding." Jonathan nodded slowly. "I agree." For a brief moment, hope appeared on Victor's face. Then Jonathan continued. "The misunderstanding is that someone here believed my wife's appearance was more important than her reservation." A hush fell over the dining room. Victor's mouth opened slightly, but no words emerged. Every explanation he had prepared suddenly sounded weak even inside his own head. Emily gently touched Jonathan's arm. "It is all right." Jonathan looked at her and smiled softly. "No, it is not." His response carried no hostility, only conviction. Then he turned back toward Victor. "My wife waited outside after being denied service despite a confirmed reservation. She was told this restaurant might not suit her needs." Victor felt heat rising into his face. Around him, guests exchanged uneasy glances. The details sounded even worse when spoken aloud. Rachel looked down at the floor. She had witnessed every word. She knew exactly what had happened. Jonathan paused before asking one final question. "Tell me honestly, Victor, if Emily had arrived wearing a designer dress and carrying a luxury handbag, would this conversation be happening right now?" Silence answered before Victor could. The truth had already entered the room. And once truth arrives, appearances lose much of their power. Victor searched desperately for a response, but every explanation sounded hollow before it ever reached his lips. The silence surrounding the reservation podium had become almost unbearable. Guests who had spent the afternoon discussing mergers, investments, and business opportunities were now witnessing something far more revealing than any financial transaction. They were watching a person's character being measured. Jonathan maintained his calm expression. He was not interested in humiliation. He was interested in accountability. There was a difference. "Mr. Carter," Victor finally said, his voice noticeably weaker than before. "I assure you that was never my intention." Jonathan nodded. "I believe that." Victor looked surprised. "You do?" "Yes," Jonathan replied. "Most people do not wake up intending to treat others unfairly. They simply allow assumptions to make decisions for them." The words landed harder than any accusation could have. Around the room, several diners quietly reflected on their own first impressions of Emily when she had entered earlier. More than a few felt uncomfortable. Emily herself remained silent. She had no interest in seeing Victor suffer. She only wanted the truth acknowledged. Then something unexpected happened. A distinguished older gentleman rose from a table near the windows and approached the group. Several guests immediately recognized him. He was Charles Whitaker, chairman of one of the largest hospitality investment firms in the Midwest. His company owned interests in luxury properties across the country. Victor's face immediately paled. "Mr. Whitaker," he said nervously. Charles barely acknowledged him. Instead, he extended his hand toward Emily. "Mrs. Carter," he said warmly. "It is good to see you again." Emily smiled and shook his hand. "Likewise, Charles." Confusion spread through the room. Victor stared in disbelief. Charles turned toward the guests. "I should probably mention something." His voice carried easily through the quiet dining room. "The Carter Foundation has helped fund educational and workforce development programs at several hospitality organizations, including some investments connected to our firm." Murmurs immediately spread through the crowd. But Charles was not finished. "In fact," he continued, "Emily personally reviews many of the community partnership initiatives we support." Victor felt his stomach sink. The realization arrived in waves. Jonathan may have been the public face everyone recognized, but Emily held influence that many people never saw. She had spent years helping direct charitable programs, educational grants, and workforce investments that impacted thousands of lives. She never advertised it. She never sought attention, which was exactly why so few people understood who she was. The room went completely silent. Rachel's eyes widened. Several guests exchanged astonished looks. The woman many had dismissed as ordinary was quietly respected by some of the most influential people in the city. Jonathan glanced toward Emily and smiled proudly. Not because of her influence, not because of her accomplishments, but because she remained exactly the same person regardless of whether anyone recognized them. Victor lowered his eyes. For the first time that afternoon, he fully understood the magnitude of his mistake. Not because Emily possessed status, not because she knew powerful people, but because he had failed to offer basic respect before knowing any of those things. And that realization hurt far more than any professional consequence ever could. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The elegant dining room that had seemed so confident earlier now sat beneath a blanket of reflection. Crystal chandeliers continued to glow overhead. Soft piano music drifted through the room. Yet something fundamental had changed. The conversation was no longer about reservations, luxury, or status. It was about dignity. Victor slowly lifted his eyes toward Emily. The confidence that had guided every decision that afternoon was gone. In its place stood a man confronting a difficult truth. "Mrs. Carter," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." The words were sincere. Not because of who Emily was, not because of who Jonathan was, but because the reality of his actions had finally become impossible to ignore. Emily looked at him for a moment before offering a gentle smile. "Thank you." There was no triumph in her voice, no satisfaction, no desire to prolong the moment. She simply accepted the apology with grace. That, more than anything else, surprised the room. Many people expected revenge when power shifted. They expected humiliation to be returned in equal measure. Instead, Emily chose something different. Jonathan watched his wife with quiet admiration. After all these years, her character still impressed him. Charles Whitaker folded his arms and smiled faintly. He had spent decades around powerful people. Very few handled influence as responsibly as Emily did. Victor cleared his throat. "If there is anything we can do to make this right, please allow us." Emily glanced around the restaurant. She saw Rachel standing nervously nearby. She saw guests pretending not to listen. She saw employees wondering what would happen next. Then she said something nobody expected. "Actually, there is." Victor immediately nodded. Anything. Emily's eyes moved across the room. Train your staff to see people before they see clothing. The silence returned. Teach them that respect should be offered before assumptions are made. Victor lowered his head. The simplicity of the request made it even more powerful. Emily was not asking for compensation. She was not demanding special treatment. She was asking for something far more important. A change in perspective. Months later, that afternoon was still remembered inside La Belle Maison. New hospitality training programs were introduced. Employees were taught that every guest deserved the same courtesy regardless of appearance. Rachel eventually became one of the restaurant's most respected supervisors. Victor often shared the story with new managers, not as a source of embarrassment, but as a lesson. As for Emily and Jonathan, they quietly continued their lives exactly as before. They attended community events, supported charitable programs, helped people whenever they could. Most strangers still had no idea who they were, and that was perfectly fine with them, because the lesson had never been about wealth. Wealth was simply the twist that revealed the truth. The real story was about how quickly people judge and how much damage assumptions can cause. Outside, the snow continued falling over Chicago that evening, covering streets, buildings, and sidewalks in the same blanket of white. Snow did not care who was rich or poor, important or unknown. It touched everyone equally. And perhaps that was the lesson the restaurant learned that day. Respect should work the same way, because the true measure of a person is not found in the labels people recognize. It is found in how they treat those they believe have nothing to offer them. And that day, everyone in the room remembered what dignity looks like.